Welcome to everybody to our third Rising to the Challenge webinar, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Over the next hour, we're going to explore a vital question: how do you fight COVID-19 and cancer, two major global challenges at the same time? So it's my pleasure to host this evening. My name's Michelle Mitchell and I'm the Chief Executive of Cancer Research UK. Although it has set off a pandemic, the virus that causes COVID-19 is actually a relatively simple organism made up of just 15 genes. Cancer, on the other hand, encompasses more than 200 diseases with hundreds of genes known to play a role and more being found every single year. And the truth is that whilst COVID-19 has caused more than 3,706 deaths worldwide, cancer is responsible for more than 9 million deaths globally every year. At Cancer Research UK, we know how vital it is to stay true to our mission to save lives through research. But at a time when minds are focused on defeating the pandemic and lockdown is keeping our researchers out of their labs, how do we keep making progress against cancer, and what impact could COVID-19 have on the future of cancer research? There is no one better to address these questions than our two fantastic guests this evening: Cancer Research UK's Chief Clinician, Professor Charlie Swanton, and Chief Scientist, Professor Karen Vousden. Charlie holds joint roles at the Francis Crick Institute and UCH, and his main interest is in investigating how tumours evolve. He is currently leading one of our most ambitious and innovative research programmes to date, called TracerX, which is investigating evolution in lung cancer. But right now, he's leading the Crick's efforts to test NHS staff for coronavirus so that they know it's safe for them to return to their life-saving duties. If you've been following the news, and I'm sure we all have, you will have seen Charlie talking about this and the urgent need to increase testing capacity. Karen is also based at the Crick, and her work focuses on understanding more about tumour suppressors, which usually help protect us from developing cancer. Recently, however, she's been involved in a project to really understand the impact of COVID-19 on funding for cancer research. I think you will all agree, in the face of this global crisis, the critical importance of research has never, ever been clearer. We fund almost half of all cancer research across the UK, thanks to our very generous supporters and donors. But sadly, we've had to make big cuts to our research expenditure, and we will need to do more in the future. But cancer doesn't stop even in a pandemic, and we remain absolutely committed to our mission to save lives through research. I know that both Charlie and Karen will agree with me that research is the answer to dealing with COVID-19 and to beating cancer. So I'm going to spend the next 25 minutes or so asking Charlie and Karen a few questions. And then we'll take yours, of course. So please do start entering your questions at any time in the message box on the left of your screen. And Charlie and Karen and I will do our best to answer them a bit later. So, good evening, Charlie and Karen. It was only this morning we spoke. Nice to see you again. Thanks for joining us. I know how busy you both are. Charlie, let's start by talking about what were you doing pre-COVID-19 and what was your lab looking at, and what were your future plans at that point?
Thank you, Michelle, and good evening to all of you on the webinar. So our lab studies cancer evolution, principally lung cancer evolution, the country, in fact, the world's biggest cancer killer, sadly. And we're trying to understand how lung cancer evolves from the first malignant tumour cell to late-stage disease when it's spread across multiple sites in the body. And we're trying to understand how this process works by sequencing tumours at diagnosis and recurrence, and ultimately at death, to really try to get towards a better and more effective way of treating this disease and, of course, understanding it. So we've been working on sort of two strands of work. The first is to try to predict which tumours are at risk of coming back after surgery, and that's led to a large phase 3 trial using technology developed through our study called TracerX in partnership with a large pharmaceutical company. And the second approach is taking immune cells from patients with lung cancer and using them to target early mutations found in every tumor cell in all parts of the body. That way, we hope to be able to overcome drug resistance and treat the disease more effectively, and we hope ultimately lead to cures. That is the sort of holy grail that motivates me to come to work in the morning.
Gosh, fantastic work, Charlie, and we'll hear a little bit more about that shortly. And in the meantime, I understand you're running a testing facility. Tell us a bit more about that.
So thank you, Michelle. Round about middle of March, a lot of my colleagues in the hospital, I have a clinical commitment at University College London Hospital, principally focused on our TRACERx study. Several of my clinical colleagues were going off sick with what appeared to be COVID-19 symptoms, but there was a lack of testing in the NHS to demonstrate that's what they had. And colleague after colleague was, they were all complaining about the same problem. They couldn't get their patients tested. We couldn't get our patients tested. We couldn't get ourselves tested in the presence of suspicious symptoms. And of course, we were concerned about the risk that presented to our patients in clinic. And it occurred to me that given the fact that the government were about to send everybody home for social distancing purposes, we've got this fabulous institute here at the CRUK Institute, 1 million square foot of space with state-of-the-art technology that is absolutely fit for purpose for diagnostic screening for COVID-19. So we repurposed several labs at the CRUK Institute whilst everybody was at home social distancing, and brought back key people with expertise in what's called RT-PCR diagnostic testing and viral inactivation in the category 3 labs. And we're now taking, and we have been for some time, taking swabs from patients and healthcare workers at North London hospitals, including University College Hospital, and routinely swabbing about 1,000 staff and patients a day and reporting those tests back using a mobile app within 24 hours of swabbing. And as of yesterday, I think we have now done in a matter of about 7 weeks, 22,500 staff and patient tests across the North London sector. So that enables us to get to treat patients safely, because we can treat them hopefully in what we call COVID protected zones, and of course protect patients and healthcare workers from ongoing transmission in hospital, which we recognise as a major route of ongoing infection during the period of lockdown. So we've been very fortunate enough to work with extremely talented people here at the CRUK to make that all possible.
Charlie, we're very fortunate for your determination, your leadership, and commitment in taking forward the testing lab. I know you've been working 24/7 to make it happen. So thank you for all of that. And you've been out in the media too, just talking about the importance of testing and why that matters for people with cancer. Would you just want to touch upon that briefly, Charlie?
Yeah, well, it's incredibly important for patients with cancer, and that was one of the main motivations, of course, because we did not want, as consultants seeing patients, to be transmitting the virus to the patients we're serving. We also have been campaigning very hard to set up with the policy team here at CRUK what we call COVID protected cancer hubs, where we can offer patients now routinely coming in for surgery and chemotherapy electively at University College Hospital testing to minimize their risk of becoming infected with a fully fledged viral infection in the middle of undergoing chemotherapy, which would of course be very worrisome indeed, given the fact that chemotherapy, as you know, Michelle, suppresses the immune system. And of course, we don't want to be treating patients who are suffering from cancer, who are also at risk of an early nascent COVID-19 infection. So by testing them in advance of chemotherapy and surgery, we can minimize their risk of infection during this very stressful time for their bodies as we're treating them. So that's now up and running at University College London Hospital Oncology Centre, and the same is true for several cancer centres across London, and we're trying to ramp that out across others, including Mount Vernon, Chase Farm, Barnet and Royal Free, to be able to offer them similar services to enable patients to come to what we call COVID protected zones to minimize their risks of infection during their cancer treatment. And
we at CRUK have been talking to clinicians and the Royal Colleges on a weekly basis just to get a picture of what's happening right across the 4 nations of the UK. Well, Charlie, you can have a little sip of your tea now, I think. I'm going to move over to Karen. Really fantastic you're here with us this evening, Karen. Could you also outline for us what your lab was doing pre-COVID-19 and what your future plans were?
Yes, of course, Michelle. Thank you. And hello to everyone who's on the line. Well, yes, I've actually spent the best part of the last 25 years trying to understand how a single protein called P53 protects us from developing cancer. So P53 is actually remarkably efficient in its job as tumour suppressor. In fact, it's so efficient that it seems that almost no cancers can arise unless P53 is somehow lost or inactivated. So all of the major cancers that we struggle with, the lung cancers that Charlie's talked about, breast, colon, pancreas, ovarian and more, can be kept in check by P53. So obviously we think this is a very important area of research. Maybe more specifically, we're working on 2 aspects of P53 biology. So one of these is to understand what P53 actually does. And the idea there is that we want to try and piece together exactly what happens when P53 is lost and how that response to the loss of P53 helps to support cancer development. So in working on this has led us into a really interesting exploration of how cancers acquire the nutrients they need to grow and survive. So we know that cancers are basically a cluster of cells that grow in an uncontrolled way, both when they shouldn't and where they shouldn't. And in order to do that, obviously they need to replicate and make more of themselves, and they need nutrients, they need food, if you like, to do that. So a very exciting line of research has been to look at whether we can use defined diets to help to augment the response to cancer therapies. So the idea here is that we can prescribe specific diets to cancer patients that are based on a deep mechanistic understanding of the metabolic demands of different cancers. And we're calling this approach precision nutrition. Our second line of attack is to understand exactly how P53 is controlled, so that if possible, we can try and turn it on again in a cancer. So we already know this can be a very effective way to treat cancers. And our previous work has actually led to the development of drugs that very efficiently reactivate P53 and that have had some success in clinical trials. So now what we're doing is we're working to refine how these drugs can work in order to try and avoid some of the downsides of this approach that we've seen in the clinic, which are toxicities that are actually associated with the activation of P53 in normal tissue, not just in the cancer, but in the normal tissue. And once again, we've got some exciting leads in this area. So all of our work is based on trying to get a clear understanding of how the systems that regulate P53 work. And in this particular project, for example, we're marrying molecular biology, protein degradation, structural biology, and sophisticated preclinical models. We believe, I guess this is where our stance, that we can't solve a problem until we understand it. And I think it's very gratifying to see the progress that we're making.
That's fantastic, Karen, and you're one of the world's leading experts in this area also. And we can also see you, unlike Charlie,
yes.
in real term. Charlie's having a few technical difficulties, but it's great to have you on the line, Charlie, in any event. So, Karen, you have, as well as taking forward your major programme of work, you've also been researching the impact of the pandemic on researchers and overall funding for cancer research. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yes, yes, of course. I mean, it's clear that in addition to having a devastating direct effect on so many people who have become ill and died with COVID-19, this pandemic is also having a catastrophic effect on funding for cancer research. So many of the aspects of our fundraising have been affected. And of course, a reduction in fundraising means a reduction in our ability to support the basic and clinical research that we're depending on to deliver new treatment options that the cancer patients so desperately need. Cancer Research UK funds some of the most, I'd say, innovative and exciting and important cancer research in the world. The UK is famous for its scientific output, and we have played a major role in the massive advances in our understanding of cancer. We're leaders in the development of new ways to approach therapies, and our clinical research, people like Charlie, are the envy of the world. So having to make funding cuts, which we inevitably will have to do as the research of the COVID-19 pandemic, is very, very difficult. To be frank with you, Michelle, we're desperately worried about what we will lose, and we're all trying incredibly hard to do as much as possible with the funding available. We want to support all the excellent studies that are ongoing now, and we want to make sure that our work and progress continues into the future. Very importantly, we want to make sure that the next generation of cancer researchers are supported and nurtured, because of course our future depends on them. We're working very hard to identify new avenues of funding so we can continue to support the world-leading cancer research that CRUK has become famous for, but it's not easy.
Oh no, and you know, as our chief scientist and chief clinician, I know funding is one of the issues that's keeping us all up at night at the moment, but anything else that's keeping you up at night, and perhaps what are your greatest concerns at the moment? Charlie, let's, now we've given you a rest and you've had a cup of tea, let's go to you now.
Thanks, Michelle. I think probably my biggest concern at the moment is, I think Karen alluded to, is our trainees. It's the young postdocs, young PhD students, in my field, the clinical trainees who translate CRUK's discovery science into the clinic, into clinical trials run through the NHS, ultimately, who will, you know, be taking my position in a few years' time as they grow up through the system, that worry me most. You know, our future, the nation's future in the context of cancer care and drug development, and translating our wonderful discovery research portfolio into clinical innovation and breakthroughs, depends upon our talented scientific and clinician workforce. And Cancer Research UK's history here has been really the envy of the world. Certainly my colleagues in Europe are staggered at the investments CRUK have made over the last 2 decades in clinical and discovery research training. For instance, I wouldn't be here without the very generous support of CRUK over the last 15 years, where they have essentially, through grants, paid for my laboratory work and my taken over my NHS salary to be able to dedicate my time to discovery cancer research, to one day, I hope, as I said to you earlier, drive ultimately improvements in survival. At least that's what I'm aiming for. And there are many people like me, but maybe 10 or 15, 20 years behind, who have similar passion, who deserve similar support. And of course, in the presence of these very worrisome funding cuts that are keeping me up at night, I'm very concerned that we may lose a generation of talented research scientists who will ultimately make the discoveries of the future that will, you know, benefit our families and loved ones.
Very, very somber thought. Karen, for you, what's keeping you up at night?
Well, I mean, I think very much the same issues that Charlie just outlined. I mean, I think a great concern to me is that we're going to lose momentum, and the progress that we've made will stall or even be lost. I mean, the research CRUK funds is part of an international effort, obviously, to beat cancer. Cancer is an international problem, and we are leaders in this global effort. Cancer Research UK are clearly leaders in this effort. Cutting back on research funding now or even for the next year will be a problem then, but it'll have consequences, I fear, that reach far deeper than the short-term impact. We will lose outstanding researchers. As Charlie says, we'll fail to train the next generation, and we'll clearly miss the chance to trial and test our new therapies in the clinic. And I think all of this will have a long-term impact on cancer patients that will be incredibly difficult to fully recover from. What's keeping me up at night is struggling with how we make decisions about what to fund and what to cut, what to keep and what to lose. You have to remember we're coming at this from the basis that we have never funded any research that's not of the highest quality. We've always been driven by a requirement for absolute excellence. So that means everything that we fund is outstanding, and any funding reduction will inevitably slice away something precious and important.
And we remain, all of us, don't we, Karen and Charlie, absolutely still committed to beating cancer together and making the case for support at the moment from government, and of course the support from our donors and volunteers who give their time and money to us to continue with our mission. I mean, Karen, how resilient do you think the cancer research landscape is in the UK then?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Michelle. I mean, I know many of our Cancer Research UK funded scientists and clinicians very well. And of course, I'm one of them. And so I understand them and the way that they work. I can say without hesitation that all of my colleagues in this endeavour are primarily motivated by a passion to help cancer patients. You know, from the basic scientists who are looking at the molecular underpinnings of cell division to our front-end clinical trials doctors who are looking to develop new, safer and more effective treatments for our patients. I mean, these are all people who are intensely motivated and driven. They work 12 hours a day, they think about their research 24 hours a day, they drive their families mad by working or thinking about work all the time. I mean, we don't understand the concept of work-life balance because our work is our hobby and we can't imagine doing anything else. So I really believe that that passion and that drive will allow us to weather this storm. Our scientists will work with the same vigour and passion. They'll do the maximum with whatever funds are available, and they'll continue to make progress. We have been through financial hard times before and survived, even flourished. It has been said that when funds run low, we simply have to think harder. Of course, we have a wonderful, equally dedicated team of fundraisers at CR UK. And, you know, we are always so deeply indebted to the generosity of the people who fund us, whether they're giving us, you know, a small amount or a large amount. The generosity of people who give money to cancer research to try and help people with cancer is always astonishing and humbling. So I'm sure that we will somehow raise enough money to keep us going until we land in better times. We are highly resilient. Of course, even this has its limit, but I hope and I do believe that we will weather this storm.
Well, that's a great message of resilience and determination, but also being united, because, you know, as a team of people, we come together with our scientists, our nurses, our doctors, our clinicians, our supporters, our marathon runners, our late night walkers, bakers, people who volunteer in our shops for us, because many of us have had our lives touched by cancer, and we believe so firmly in research being the route to improve survival in this country and around the world. So nice to see the kind of resilience and a little bit of optimism shining through in these gloomy days at the moment. I'm going to kind of move us on, Charlie, and ask you, how do you think cancer research in the UK will actually start to recover from COVID-19? What are the first steps?
It's a jolly good question. I think we have to focus on our core purpose first and foremost. and underpin and support our most productive science. The discovery research engine has always been the fuel to the clinical developments, and the research environments that we've supported historically have been the bedrock of much of the cancer biology and cancer treatments that we use today in the clinic. So continuing to support those research environments, and I'm talking about, you know, the institutes and the universities and our major centres during this funding crisis, is going to be crucial, because that's where the training occurs, that's where the discovery research occurs, that's where the delivery of our clinical trial portfolio occurs. Keeping those environments going, making sure they aren't cut too aggressively, showing that we have solidarity with our university partners that deliver the translation, is going to be absolutely vital. Many of our universities are going to be facing, I hate to use the word unprecedented because we keep using it, but it is true, funding cuts approaching £2.5 billion over the next year or two, that will create huge pressure on the research output of our university and major centres and the institutes that are affiliated with them. So we have to focus on maintaining those environments and weathering the storm. Now, inevitably, that is going to mean that we won't be able to employ as many research scientists for every project we're running. But the key is to keep those environments going and keep them thriving, so that when we are in a better position to grow following this crisis, we can come back to where we were, you know, 4 or 5 months ago, relatively quickly, and not delay. I mean, I think what we forget is just how quickly Cancer Research UK has grown as a successful charity since, you know, I was a young graduate student in the 90s at ICRF. You know, the budget of ICRF was very much less than the budget of Cancer Research UK is today. And in many ways we've been, you know, so successful. It sort of magnifies the cuts that we are being faced with today. So I think, you know, we have grown. We have got a remarkable infrastructure. We know how to invest in that infrastructure to keep it going, and that's what we'll do to be able to grow out of this storm once it abates. And we will thrive again, but it will take time and investment.
Thank you, Charlie. You talk about when you were younger. I didn't know you when you, a few years ago, you turned up fresh-faced, as you are now, to Cancer Research UK and pitched a highly ambitious programme to the charity to revolutionise our understanding of a cancer that kills more than any other, lung cancer. And the initial results of that programme, TracerX, are being made public. Could you just talk to us about its aims, some of its successes and impact, and how important long-term investment is to ensure that we innovate and fund blue skies research as well?
That's right. Thank you, Michelle. So in about 2012, we published a paper in a journal called New England Journal, which showed that tumours are evolving entities, essentially underpinning what we'd already expected but had little proof for, because we didn't have the technology back in the 90s to be able to prove it. I said to patients in clinic, you know, unfortunately your tumour is evolving in a Darwinian way, which means that resistance to therapy almost always occurs due to this process of evolution occurring at the sort of single cell tumour level. And the advent of large-scale sequencing enabled us to decipher that in much more detail. But of course, you'll be aware when thinking about Darwin's finches and the Galapagos Islands, that evolution can't just be considered in the context of one species, but has to be considered in the context of the environment that species evolves in. You know, in the context of, you know, whether there's plentiful water or whether the ground is dry, and what the you know, the bird, let's say one of the Galapagos finches, what does it eat, and how plentiful is that food? And so we applied that type of thinking, Darwin's thinking, in sort of the mid-19th century to to cancer in the 21st century and came to CRUK in 2013 with an ambitious proposal to study 900 patients with early stage lung cancer and sample their tumours in intense detail after surgery, after the tumour had been resected with the intent of cure, to understand how the tumour had evolved from a single cell, as I mentioned earlier, and how it had become branched in a Darwinian manner up to the point of diagnosis. And then following surgery, we planned to take blood from patients every 3 months to see if we could find evidence of the tumour coming back in blood prior to recurrence. And then if the tumour does recur, we would ask patients for a rebiopsy of their disease to understand which of the branches from the original tumour, as it were, Darwin's branched evolutionary tree, which branch seeded the recurrence, to understand the process of cancer evolution from the primary sites to the distant sites of metastatic disease, such as the liver or the bone or the brain, etc. And it's that process of metastasis, the spread of tumour cells from the primary tumour in the lung to the brain or the liver or the bone, that ultimately results in patient death. And as an oncologist, as a treating thoracic lung oncologist, it's absolutely imperative for us to understand that process. And so we propose to CRUK, by tracking cancer evolution through space and time, one day we might be able to understand how cancers grow up in the lung environment around what is called a predatory environment, because the immune cells are constantly trying to stop the cancer from evolving, much as Darwin's finches are predated upon by larger mammals. We wanted to understand how cancers are predated upon by the immune system. And we are beginning to understand this process in unprecedented depth, thanks to the huge investment and bold investment by Cancer Research UK back in 2014 that have now shed light, that investment has now shed light on this process of branched evolution, treatment resistance, tumour metastasis that is spread from the primary site to distant sites, and ultimately how the immune system controls the tumour and stops it spreading, and how sometimes it fails to stop it spreading. And it's that insight that has led to these new trials I was mentioning earlier. Firstly, intervening before we can see the disease reoccur on a CT scan, before it's spread, with the hope of curing the patient following surgery for those tumours that are destined to relapse. And secondly, using the body's own immune system to fight the tumour more aggressively, to act as sort of the bold predator, as it were, that will finally stop that tumour from ultimately resulting in patient death, which is, as I keep saying, our holy grail, to be able to one day, I hope, use these advances to cure patients with this disease.
And Charlie, very briefly, because we've got some great questions we want to get onto shortly, why is the long-term investment so important? Could you just very briefly touch upon that as an issue?
The long-term investment is crucial. These discoveries, Cancer Research UK started funding us in 2008. It wasn't until 2013 that we came up with this bold idea that CRUK invested in. And we only started making these discoveries about 18 months ago. So if you look at it as a whole, it's been a 10-year program to get to the first sets of papers, which have given us these advances to set up trials that have taken another 4 years to set up. So the whole process takes, from thoughts of a route forward, the first big bold idea, to delivering a clinical trial, and to reporting on that clinical trial can take 15 to 20 years. It's half a career in the context of
the goal
of my
is
career.
So huge, isn't it, Charlie?
Yes,
the goal
it takes
is so
a very long time, and of course, for every investment CRUK makes, we can't guarantee those investments will pay off. And in any discovery research field, not every idea is going to deliver, and that's all part of taking a bold risk to invest in what we hope will one day be the big discoveries of the future that will lead to the big therapeutic advances that we all so wish for.
Well, as CEO of Cancer Research UK, I'm so proud to be associated with this work, Charlie, and the work that you're leading, because we do believe it will transform the lives of people with lung cancer. So thank you for your leadership. I'm going to move us on. We've had some great questions in. A couple have been posted before we started, and please encourage you. I will try and get through as many as we can in the next 20 minutes or so. So a question from Clive, firstly for Charlie. If a COVID-19 vaccine is developed, will cancer sufferers with suppressed immune systems be able to receive it?
That's a very good question. The answer
there's
is...
even better, you know, there's many more good questions to come, I can promise you.
That's a very difficult question to answer. So when patients are embarking on chemotherapy, we like patients to have vaccines well in advance of chemotherapy, for the simple reason that, as you rightly say, chemotherapy suppresses the immune system. Of course, the first thing is that it's not clear to me what vaccine is going to be successful. Will it be an RNA vaccine? Will it be a viral vaccine? We don't know. And depending upon what type of vaccine we're dealing with and how successful that vaccine is, it really will influence the decision whether to offer it to our patients and when to offer it, because of course no two patients with cancer are the same. But in broad terms, you would want to give the vaccine to a patient before they've undergone their immunosuppressive treatment, well in advance, not during, and that's usually the advice we give.
Thank you, Charlie. Moving on to Karen, an anonymous question. I've read in the news a bit about how cancer researchers are using their ideas to tackle COVID-19. Will this have any benefits for their cancer research, and are there things that can be applied?
Oh, thanks, Michelle. That's another great question.
There's some lovely ones.
Let's try and see the positive in all this. I mean, absolutely, there will be learnings from the way that COVID-19 works and the way that the body responds to this viral infection that will be very valuable in informing us on how cancer work and how cancer patients respond. I mean, the concept that we can learn from viruses and apply that to cancer has been around for decades. In fact, you know, the very first understandings of how the genetics of cancer work was based on how viruses work. So there is actually quite a lot of parallels between a virally infected cell, which is doing a lot of things to support the virus, and a cancer cell, which is being reprogrammed to support the cancer. And undoubtedly, understanding how you know, COVID infects cells, and particularly the host response, the person's response to that viral infection, will give us insights into the way that we respond to having a cancer.
Thank you, Karen. We've had a question posted by Richard. This is for you, Charlie. Lovely question. If you look back 10 years, what are the most important improvements in cancer treatment? And if you look forward 10 years, what improvements do you anticipate? And do you expect the speed of progress to increase?
Yeah, okay, thank you for that question, Richard. I think for me, the greatest breakthrough in the last decade, without a shadow of a doubt, has been demonstration that the immune system can tackle cancers. When I was at medical school, we had great hope that that would be the case in the early 90s. And indeed, actually, I nearly did a PhD to use patients' immune cells to target cancers. But I was told at the time that by my course mentor that to do so would be madness, because the immune system was never going to be able to tackle a cancer. And anyway, immunology was all phenomenology and a complete waste of time. That's pretty much what the course mentor said. So he encouraged me not to pursue that course. Then I eventually qualified and I became a medical oncologist. And I trained with a mentor called Martin Gore, a dear friend who very sadly died tragically about 18 months ago. But doing a clinic with him in 2005 in a melanoma clinic, he was just despairing. He said, I've been using these drugs for 40 years and they're the same drugs I've been using for 40 years, and the response rate is about 5%. It's only about 5% of my patients benefit. I'm really getting to the end of my tether, because I know that most of the time I offer these drugs to my patients, they're not going to benefit. And then almost overnight, and I'm not exaggerating, a new class of drug came on board called the checkpoint inhibitor therapies. And suddenly this disease, melanoma, advanced melanoma, that was killing almost all of his poor patients, suddenly was a disease that we were, for the first time ever, we're using the words cure and melanoma in the same sentence, which, you know, both of us at the time thought would have been impossible. And I think what that taught us is that, you know, now today, you know, my melanoma colleagues would estimate that maybe 40%, possibly even 50% of their patients will be cured by these drugs. Is a phenomenal advance that really, I think Martin Gore and myself wouldn't have dreamt of back in 2005, barely 15 years ago. And I think what this teaches you is that, you know, in oncology, advances that don't seem to occur in a linear way at all. You know, that is, you get one advance a year, every year for 10 years. Sometimes nothing will happen for 5 years, 10 years even, and then suddenly something will happen that totally changes your view on a subject that many of us had written off. Many of us had written off the power of the immune system to target cancers. And actually, as a twist of fate, 30 years after I was discouraged from using one's own T cells to target patients' tumours, or patients' own T cells to target patients' tumours, that's exactly what we're doing now in the context of our new clinical trials that are derived from TracerX. So, you know, we now know a lot more about cancers, and we can now target T cells, immune cells, to specific tumour mutations. And, you know, the beauty about science is that sustained investment can make the impossible possible. And that is what I think is just so exciting and gives me so much optimism about the future. So I fully expect the pace of change to increase over the next decade, because technologies are just so much better and faster, and communication is so much better and faster than it was a decade or 2 decades ago. And the pace of change is just remarkable.
The possibilities are great, aren't they? The possibilities
absolutely.
to accelerate progress.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Charlie, and good evening to Alison. Nice you've been able to join us, Alison. Question: have there been any new experiences or lessons learned over the past few weeks of operating through the COVID pandemic that might be helpful when considering cancer research in the future? Karen, should we come to you? What have we learned through this period, and how can we apply it to cancer research?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have learned, and that would be incredibly valuable if we could continue this in the future, is that establishing clinical trials and trying to find ways of bringing new, potentially valuable therapies into patients can be done much more quickly and with much less red tape than we had previously thought. I think, you know, needs must. And when we get to the point where we really have an epidemic or a pandemic like this, it focuses people's minds. And I think, you know, we have learned that there are ways, you know, certainly not to compromise safety. Nobody wants that. But there are ways to reduce, maybe, let's say, the level of bureaucracy that has evolved around clinical trials. I mean, I'm sure Charlie will agree with me here. You know, as researchers, of course, we want to see our research being applied in patients and helping cancer patients as rapidly as possible. And, you know, if we can streamline the systems in a way that seems to have been done when we've been looking at ways to tackle COVID-19, and apply that in the future when we're no longer in this crisis, but we in the COVID-19 crisis, but still, you know, in the cancer crisis, can we more efficiently help patients? I think that would be a great lesson to have learned from all of this.
Yeah, I couldn't. Maybe I could quickly add to that, because I completely agree. I mean, you know, we've had a total of about, globally, in the last 3 months, 376,000 COVID deaths. cancer kills 10 million patients a year globally. I very much doubt, I certainly hope, COVID won't reach that in the next 8 months. And I think we have to have that in perspective, that one of my biggest concerns about COVID, this COVID crisis, it's going to take attention away from long-term investments in cancer research that's so desperately needed for our patients. And when one puts this into perspective, that cancer will continue to result in the deaths of 10 million a year globally, and that COVID will hopefully be a distant nightmare and memory 18 months from now, that just tells us we cannot accept the previous status quo, where the pace of regulation and governance impeded trial development, as it has done. And I think what we've seen is that COVID trials can be set up incredibly quickly. And I think patients would demand nothing less for cancer trials once we come out of this. And actually, we're writing a position paper on this at the moment to try to galvanize the community into basically saying it's just not good enough. We have to accelerate the pace of progress in cancer research once this is over, and adopt the same principles that we had for COVID during this crisis.
I couldn't agree more, Charlie. And do you think blue skies research thinking will be important in a post-COVID world? One of the questions we've received is, should funding be focused on more short-term ideas to try and get some quick wins?
No, I'm a firm believer that the greatest discoveries in medicine have come out of blue skies research, actually. Time and time again, when one looks at the breakthroughs and tracks their histories, they've come from not chasing short-term wins. It's very tempting to do that, but in reality, there is no substitute for sustained long-term investment in the discovery research portfolio. That's just absolutely vital. And for instance, you know, the example I gave you earlier around checkpoint inhibitor blockade, it came from, it didn't come from studying cancer biology. It came from blue skies research in immunology that led ultimately to 2 Nobel Prizes for medicine the year before last. So it's really, and obviously, most importantly, forget about the prizes, it's resulted in cancer cures for many patients with melanoma and many other cancers.
Save lives and
exactly.
improve survival. So
question, if I could just
yes, please,
add
Karen.
Thank you. You know, I mean, I'm obviously a basic cancer research biologist, but when you look back over history, I think it's very clear that many of the most significant breakthroughs and the things that have helped more patients than anything have come from blue skies basic researchers who quite often, as Charlie pointed out, are working in areas that people have written off, or, you know, the great and the good have decided have no future and won't yield any benefit. It's a combination of obviously investing in the whole piece. We have to invest in near-term goals. We have to invest in clinical trials. We have to invest in the development of new drugs. The whole process takes a painfully long time, although I think we're getting better at it. But, you know, if I think, you know, back to what I've been involved with when I was a young girl, which was much longer ago than when Charlie was a young boy, I was interested in a virus, the papilloma virus, and some of the work that I did back then has, you know, contributed to a huge body of work that's ended in essentially a vaccine that may prevent women from developing cervical cancer. You know, I mean, just from a personal level, for me to have started research in that area to the point where my teenage daughter got this vaccine, it was, you know, I'd have to say it was one of the proudest days of my life, because you really begin to see that even though you're just a basic molecular biologist, and I made the tiniest of contributions, what we do is important, and we can't lose sight of the fact, I think, that we need to make that investment in basic science, in blue skies research, in order to stand a chance of making real progress for cancer patients.
I think you're both absolutely right. And I'm going to keep us going for the next 4 or 5 minutes. We've got a few questions. I'm determined to get all of them in. So if we could have shorter answers for the next 3, that would be great. And then everyone will be happy by the end of it. But we could listen to you for another hour, both of you. So this is one for Charlie and Karen. Funding depending. What is the most exciting piece of cancer research you've seen on the horizon, and what could be crucial that we as supporters could help make it happen?
Oh dear. Okay. Very quickly, one of the things I'm most fascinated by, and technology is now allowing us to understand better, is how the cancer interacts with the patient. You know, one of the phenomena that we see so often and we know nothing about is why does cancer cause this sort of wasting syndrome in some patients with weight loss. Patients won't eat, they don't feel like eating, they lose their appetite, they lose weight very quickly and lose their muscle bulk, and almost waste away in front of your eyes, and it's just tragic watching it. And yet we know nothing about the mechanisms, very little about the mechanisms that underpin it. And I think we've got we're in a time now where we know so much about metabolism from Karen's work and others, and tumor biology, and understand about hormone-driven diseases and what have you, that we've got an opportunity to really understand this process and, most importantly, intervene to improve patients' health and well-being. So for me, that's probably the most exciting, tangible prize, I think, that we could offer patients in the next decade.
Thank you, Charlie. Karen?
I couldn't agree more with Charlie. As I've already said, you know, my research interest is in this area of metabolism, both the metabolism of the cancer and also how, you know, whole body systemic metabolism interacts with the cancer. There's two-way conversations there. I've mentioned a little bit the dietary approaches that we're very, very excited about. But, you know, we know that whole body metabolism has a massive influence on the way that cancers develop and whether they develop. We know, for example, that obesity is strongly linked with the development of certain cancers, maybe the counterpoint to the wasting and cachexia that Charlie just spoke about. But all of these things are tantalizingly connected, and we don't really understand how. And all of it is also linked with our immune response. So this comes back to the as Charlie mentioned, the most you know, exciting breakthrough in cancer therapy, which has been fabulous, but still doesn't work for everyone. And you know, if we can understand how these different systems interact with each other and make that therapeutic approach even more work even better in more patients, I think that's a great hope for the next years.
Thank you. And Charlie, I'm going to end with a couple of questions, some of which you might be able to do yes, no, very quick responses. If possible, in 2 minutes, please, Charlie.
Okay.
Do other cancer types evolve as much as lung cancer? Will the TracerX project be able to be related to other cancers as well?
Yes, broadly speaking, I think that yes, definitely. The rules will be very similar, I think, across all tumours, but their origins, of course, will be different. So the answer is yes.
Why is chemotherapy still the predominant treatment of choice, given that it suppresses the immune system?
Chemotherapy, despite all of our knowledge, we still don't really understand how chemotherapy works, would you believe? Why is it that the cancer cells are more susceptible to chemotherapy than normal cells? The basis of that is really still very poorly understood, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Are you planning any research into SARS-CoV-2?
Yes, but
Great.
not so much so that it would distract me from my day job.
Well, I have to say, can you believe it? It's 6:26. We've answered all the questions. You have given us your knowledge, your insight, your opinions. It's been a great session. Thank you so much, Charlie and Karen, for your time. I've certainly enjoyed it. I hope our guests have as well. And thank you for being so engaging. I just wanted to say before we close that our guests will shortly receive a follow-up email from us to thank you for your participation and to also let you know about the next webinar in the series. The email will offer you the opportunity to contribute to our emergency appeal to help us get cancer research back on track. As you've heard today, we really do need your help. So if you're in a position to assist, it would be enormously appreciated, and we would be very grateful. So it only leaves me to say stay safe, stay well, and I hope to speak to you all again soon. So good evening, everybody.